In the Novak family, there was one unbreakable rule: whoever returned home first from work had to prepare dinner. In the early days of family life, this responsibility usually fell on the fragile shoulders of Mrs. Vera. As a regular accountant, she finished her workday at a time when everyone else was just starting to glance longingly at the clock. Rushing home, since her workplace was half an hour away by foot, Vera immediately started cooking. Her husband didn't appreciate leftovers from the previous night's dinner and could easily refuse to eat if store-bought dumplings or soup from 2 days ago were served. "Vera, you know I don't like anything that's not fresh," Victor would say, puckering his lips in disappointment as he pushed his plate aside. "I work 10-hour shifts and come home much later than you. Is it really that difficult to prepare something tasty for your beloved husband?" Victor would raise his eyebrow seriously, as if implying that Vera had no idea what it was like working in his accounting office, where they allegedly spent half the day drinking tea and gossiping. "Understand, I'm the man, I bring in the money, and I have the right to a hot dinner. You're just a woman, so you're obligated to provide me with dinner. How you do it and what you cook doesn't concern me," Victor would continue to explain, treating Vera as if she were a grade schooler. Vera nodded obediently. Arguing with someone who paid the rent and bought most of the household items was extremely short-sighted. But after such unpleasant conversations, she resolved firmly that she needed to increase her income, to become at least less dependent on her husband, and ideally to contribute as much money to the household as Victor did. Vera was determined not to give up, so she immediately started looking for a new job. Unfortunately, employers were not eager to hire someone with little experience for a higher salary, but luck turned her way after a month of searching. "Here's the situation in our firm. We need an accountant with potential to become the head accountant." A man in glasses who introduced himself as Mr. Edward explained to Vera. "But as long as our chief accountant, Mrs. Natalia, is working hard before her well-deserved retirement, you'll need to prove yourself properly for a couple of years." Becoming the head accountant in a couple of years? Vera couldn't even imagine such a prospect. Of course, she was willing to work day and night to eventually obtain the coveted position. In her dreams, she already saw herself as an important woman, driving her own car instead of taking the bus, and always wearing red lipstick. "Agreed," Vera whispered hoarsely. Her voice faltered from nervousness instantly. "Well, that's great." Mr. Edward leaned back in his chair, opened a drawer, and retrieved some documents. "For the time being, the salary will be minimum wage, and then we'll see." Although Victor was unhappy that his wife had taken a new job, he didn't say anything. After all, Vera now spent an hour and a half commuting from work, so they usually arrived home at around the same time. But just a couple of months later, Vera started coming home even later, 10 or 20 minutes after her husband. "We need to talk." Victor couldn't hold it in when they were offered quickly toasted sandwiches and salad for dinner. "Honestly, I can't even speak," Vera pleaded with him. "Are you so tired?" "They gave me 2 extra areas to cover. Julia went on sick leave. And Mrs. Natalia is on vacation." "Vera, this doesn't work for me," Victor said firmly, looking at his wife. "If your workday ends at 5, then you should leave at 5. You tell Mr. Edward that you actually have a husband. He needs to be fed." "Are you serious? To tell him that my husband can't eat on his own, so I have to leave unfinished work? Are you disabled?" Victor was stunned by this turn of events. How dare she speak like that to him? "That's it, I'm going to bed," Vera yawned and got up from the table. "Please put the dishes in the sink, I'll wash them tomorrow." "Or wash them if you don't mind." Victor was almost speechless at such audacity. Had this woman completely forgotten who she was? But the events took an even more interesting turn. A week later, Victor was unexpectedly fired from his job. The construction company where he worked suddenly declared bankruptcy, and the new 9-story building their team had been working on was put on hold indefinitely. Misfortune never comes alone, and literally the next day, the landlady of the apartment Victor and Vera rented doubled the rent. "What did you expect?" she replied when Victor asked about the rent increase. "They're starting to build a metro 2 blocks away, they've even put up a fence. If the apartment becomes more valuable, then the rent goes up too." "Don't like it? Move out." Moving out wasn't something they wanted to do. And where would they go anyway? In the nearby area. Prices had suddenly skyrocketed, like spring greens in a gardener's bed in May. It was cheaper out of town, but in that case, Vera couldn't make it to work by the start of the workday, as suburban transportation wasn't as regular as desired. "I told you, you should quit," Victor started his harangue again, but then stopped himself. Because now Vera was the sole breadwinner, and he couldn't find a job as quickly as he wanted. "I'll figure something out," Vera confidently declared, and by evening, she returned with a solution. "So, listen, Mr. Edward is actually selling an apartment in our area. He offered it to me for a ridiculously low price. Plus, he deducts the rent from my salary now. And then after 5 years, we can even buy it outright. There's some former maid's quarters, not even windows." "No windows?" Victor looked at her skeptically. "And how are you going to settle things with this Mr. Edward of yours?" "I'm telling you, it's all a bit suspicious," Victor frowned. "Don't want to? Let's not move then." "But then we need to find some money for the landlady," Vera sighed. "By the way, what's for dinner tonight?" "Dumplings," Victor grumbled gloomily. After a couple of weeks of forced vacation, he was already tired of cooking. Especially now that he had to cook not just once a day, but at least twice, as he didn't want to go without lunch himself. The former maid's quarters were a 5-minute walk away and, despite the lack of windows, were quite cozy. Light wallpaper and suspended ceilings with clouds painted on them gave the apartment a sense of space, and a large painting on one of the walls depicting a green forest even partially replaced the window. Victor bit his lip and scrutinized the accommodation critically. "All right, it'll do. It's all a bit strange, though." Now Vera had to work for 3 people. At any cost, she wanted to prove herself at work, so she literally worked herself to the bone, covering several areas. Often, she would come home well after dark. Victor, who was initially unhappy with the changes in his spouse, now remained silent, and sometimes even encouraged Vera. Vera simply nodded, as her husband was right, she had chosen this job herself. However, the prospect of becoming the head accountant was indefinitely postponed, as Mrs. Natalia showed no intention of leaving her position. So now Vera worked tirelessly, with no days off, just for the opportunity to rent cheap housing. And, of course, for self-realization. Meanwhile, Victor noticeably relaxed. If at first he actively sought employment, now he stopped making any efforts to find something worthwhile. "You know, I'm not willing to settle for a small salary," Victor explained to Vera. "And they don't offer a big one, so you seem to be doing fine with your job." Gradually, Victor even slacked off in doing the one thing that was required of him, cooking dinner. All day long he played computer games and lounged on the couch. And in response to Vera's timid requests to start financially contributing to the family, he just shrugged. "Can't I take a break once in my life, after all?" Victor waved his hands. "And besides, at my age, it's indecent to work for someone else. I saw on the internet today how one guy makes keychains at home and sells them online. You know how much he makes a month?" "How much?" Vera asked wearily, setting the grocery bags on the floor. The task of shopping also subtly fell onto her fragile shoulders, as it was much easier for her to run out and buy everything needed after work. 10 grand, Victor proudly replied, as if he personally earned that much money. "I think I should give it a try too, but I need some startup capital." Will you give it to me? But the keychains venture didn't work out, nor did the ceramic tiles or aromatic candles. Vera obediently invested in her husband's business plan, but her faith in him bringing in an income dwindled day by day. But the final straw was not Victor's lack of entrepreneurial spirit. One day, returning home from work and not finding her husband at home, Vera instinctively headed to the kitchen. There she found a surprise waiting for her. On the table were two half-empty mugs of tea, one of which had lipstick marks. When the shock wore off a bit, Vera found a frying pan in the sink with remnants of fried potatoes. Yeah, I had a former colleague over. Olga, she works at the plant. And what's the big deal? I'm a man, and you're always at work, so it's your fault. Vera snapped. That fried potato was the last straw for Vera. It pushed her to say to Victor what she had hesitated to say for a very long time, about his immaturity, his unwillingness to work, and about his increasingly rotund figure. Anyway, I'm leaving you, Vera announced. Starting Monday, I'm being promoted to head accountant. I'll manage the higher salary on my own somehow. Before, I didn't notice any flaws in you because I was financially dependent on you, but now you're just a loser who doesn't appreciate a good relationship. Wait, what do you mean you're leaving? Victor asked incredulously. But how will we pay for the apartment? That's the only thing you're interested in, Vera smirked. Ask your Olga how you'll pay for the apartment. For several days, Vera stayed in the nearest hotel. She had no desire to return home, and only when Victor, offended by his wife's behavior, moved in with his parents, since he had no other option, did she manage to return to her own home. Of course, Victor tried to reconcile, and even quickly found a job, but Vera made a firm decision for herself, let her husband cook dinner for someone else, and filed for divorce. A year later, her income allowed her to take out a loan and buy the apartment she had grown to love. And her personal life also improved. Her new young man doesn't hesitate to fry potatoes or even make sushi at home. All because he's a chef in a major restaurant. But that's a whole different story.